Jodi Voice Yellowfish is the founder and chair of MMIW, which stands for Murdered and Indigenous Women, Texas Rematriate organization. And she's going to speak a little bit on the topic, but also speak about how her organization deals with this topic in our local region, right? Closer to where we are, not just nationwide. So without further ado, I will give Jodi the microphone, I guess, technically speaking.
Okay. So hi, everyone. I got here like right on time. I usually give myself a little more time. But yeah, so once again, my name is Jodi Voice Yellowfish. I am Muskogee Creek, Oglala, Lakota, and Cherokee. And I do a lot of different things in my community. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I've lived in Oak Cliff my whole life, and I'm a product of the U.S. government's relocation program, as Dallas is a relocation site. But I come from a lot of different spaces, a lot of different organizing and activism in and around Dallas. I also am co-chair for the board for Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. As well, I'm a commissioner with the Arts and Culture Advisory Board for the City of Dallas. It's 2023, I'm 41 years old, and this is the first time an American Indian has been on any advisory boards in the City of Dallas. So that says a lot. Yeah, but I am the founder and chair of, or a founder and the chair of MMIW Texas Rematriate. And yeah, so we'll just dive right into this, right? Our mission for MMIW Texas Rematriate is to search for and bring home our missing relatives, to support and offer healing processes to our missing and murdered and their families, and to advocate for social change on behalf of all Indigenous relatives. So that sounds really simple. We get asked a lot how we directly help families and people in this situation, and I always get these looks like, that's it? Like, that's really simple, but you have to keep in mind when you're in the crisis scenario, the situation of somebody missing, a relative, a loved one, you're not really thinking straight. You go into emergency crisis mode, and you have one goal in mind as, recovering your relative, your loved one. And in that scenario, a lot of people, they'll skip over, like what you think would be the simplest things to remember, like safely creating a flyer for them, how you share it safely, filing a missing persons report, things like that. So at the core of what we do is that we help in that crisis situation. We only help families when they ask us to. We want the family to feel like they are being heard and in charge of what's happening. So we may make ourselves available and then step back and wait until they're ready for our help. And I say to safely do these things, file a report, create a missing persons flyer, because like I said, when you're in that crisis mode, you're not thinking straight. And a lot of times, more often than not, we've seen families in this situation, and the first thing they do is go to their social media and put their phone number. I have yet to see a case that does not have fake ransom and fake tips. I don't know why somebody would want to call in fake tips to put, what's the point of it? What do they get out of it? I don't know. But fake ransom is exactly that. They're trying to get money. And so when we say safely, that's what we do. We educate on why it's unsafe to put your phone number out like that. And that's met with a lot of opposition a lot of time. When you're in panic and you have your child not with you, you'll do anything, right? Like you want whoever to have that contact. And we've been screamed at and cussed at. They think it's the dumbest thing to ever do, and then they have ransom. Then they'll have ransom calls and be like, "Oh, I have so and so. They need their medicine, and send me this much to this Cash App at this time," and you get to talk to them on the phone. And we can tell them exactly how it's going to happen, and it happens the same exact way every time. But also, we're we're kind of a buffer between the family and speaking to media, speaking to law enforcement, because a lot of people have a lot of trauma with both dealing with the media and law enforcement. I have to check my own biases when it comes to the police, especially in Dallas. I'm not the biggest fan of the Dallas Police Department for my own reasons. You know, I bring my own trauma with me when I go into these spaces, and I have to put that aside and focus on what we have to do at hand. And so that helps me understand also why a family would tell me they don't want to call the cops. Because that happens. We've been told, you know, like, can we try this first? I can't make anybody file a report, and I definitely can't do it for a family. A family has to do it. And so we have to help them understand that the sooner we do this, the easier it's going to be. I have not seen yet the process look the same for each case. In Dallas, we're told, you know, you can call the missing persons unit. You call them, they tell you, you got to call 911. You call 911, they tell you, go to the missing persons unit. So we're there to kind of prepare them and help them understand that there's a lot of flaws and inconsistencies to working in a broken system, like dealing with law enforcement and CPS and kinship and foster care, things like that. There's huge process to these things and a lot of waiting, and we try to help the family do that. But also, we haven't had a ton of casework, but we have a pretty successful recovery rate. And so I say that because that helps understand that without necessarily having casework, we do a lot of work of networking and finding resources, connecting people to care after, because even if somebody has run away, they subject themselves to a lot of things they didn't plan. You know, being on the street, being in the wrong place at the wrong time kind of situations, or running away and being abducted after. So when somebody's recovered and you know, they're back to their family, that's just the start, you know, the start of their healing journey for the rest of their lives, and for the family as well. So we try to make ourselves as available as possible for cultural and spiritual support and wellness and things like that, but also be that conduit to, we have a social worker now at our Indian Health Services site and things like that. Like, let us help you understand this tract of how you get to this sober living facility or things like that. So it's a lot of different things for the work that we do. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over, actually had COVID a couple weeks ago, and it's just lingering. all of the effects are still there, but I am negative though. But I do have cough drop because I'm trying to get over all of this. But so what is MMIW? So you'll see MMIW, literally missing and murdered Indigenous, and it can be women. It'll be WG, it'll be women and girls, or WG2S would be women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. And Two-Spirit is our non-binary LGBTQ plus relatives. And more lately, you'll see MMIP for people and R for relative. And to understand how this work really came to be, you have to understand where the name came for this crisis, right? Like, it's not a new thing, not a new crisis, but in Canada, I would say the earliest I remember is maybe between 2013 and 15, when the work of finding women in Canada grew to this big call to action against the government. You have to look into why we have these astronomically high rates of our women going missing. And so when that call to action happened, this acronym really became a kind of rallying cry to get community together to look at this and kind of say to each other, we have the right to not only question, but to activate ourselves if nobody else is going to help us find our people. So once that activation started, it spread everywhere over Canada. All the awareness started happening, and then it trickled into the States. And once it kind of trickled into the States, in the northern states, that's when it really became this very broad, not just MMIW, but reflective of all the cases, which were everybody. Girls, boys, women, elders, men, everybody. There's cases of everybody, every age you can think of, every identification, anything. There are tons of cases. And also with the MMIP, MMIR, it's used a lot more now. We stuck with MMIW because that's how our program started, and people refer to us as such, so it's easier to keep that amongst our community. But with our organization specifically, we help everyone. We don't discriminate in any of the help that we offer. And I really like, I'm a fan of Wakia Jane. This is her artwork. But we're taught as women, we as women are sacred because we are life givers. And that's kind of why when it started, it was just focused on women. It was kind of this feeling of this reclamation was kind of happening of our connection to the land and ceremony and everything about that, and kind of calling out this imbalance in our communities and why this was happening. And this focus on women really helped connect a lot of people to a lot of things about why we as people are sacred, and which helped people understand that every individual is sacred and that every individual deserves the respect and the resources it needs to not only be found once you're missing, but to be safe before and after. Excuse me. So, and I always forget this when I do this presentation on my own. Our community, our organization, we usually do this, we try to do it 2 people at a time, because it can be a really heavy topic. It can, depending on who's here with us when we do it, people need support talking about this work. And we often open and close with prayer. I'm going to keep going since we already got started, but we keep prayer in the center of our work because the work we do is sacred. And we say that because of the level of care we offer each individual and their family, but also when we educate on this, which is a lot, but when you don't have casework, you're doing presentations like this, you're educating the public on what this crisis is. And to understand that, we tell a lot of stories. We share information about cases, things that we can share, but we speak a lot of names, like Savannah Graywind. So when we say the work is sacred, it's because if we say somebody's name, we speak somebody's name, it's like inviting them into the space with us, right? And the work we do and the spaces we do, we try to keep it as respectful and reverent as possible, because we do that. We recognize people that aren't with us, and that's a very sacred act to do. Some people, they don't speak the names of their loved ones that have passed on. And with our work, I've actually reached out to Savannah's family so that I could speak her name in this education portion of our work, and they were okay with that. They understood that. It helps me tell the story of how I got into this work. And so Savannah is the case that grabbed me and I couldn't shake it. This is the case that I learned about it and I was just like, I can't just be idle, right? I can't just sit there and not do something. So I've had the privilege to attend Haskell Indian Nations University. My dad attended when it was Haskell Institute. My sister attended after me. My niece, I have cousins there now. It's a really special place. Haskell was one of the first military-run boarding schools in the U.S. and was one of the boarding schools that the goal was assimilation and to separate children from tribes. And so it's really sacred ground, not just the history, but we have a cemetery there. There's like 100 children that are accounted for. We can visit the space that it used to be a jail. There's tiny handcuffs in the museum there. It's got a crazy history. But because of that really heavy history, there's been this really thoughtful care that's put into the current day, the present situation of it being a university now and reclaiming what was taken from us, right? And it's a tribal college, so you have to be a tribal citizen to attend. And there's just tons of tribes represented. So many tribes represented, and you see people just really blossoming into who they are, reconnecting with their culture, connecting with different people, making new chosen family, and starting their families, right? That was something I saw a lot. I saw a lot of people falling in love, starting their families, right? And this was the case with Savannah. She wasn't at Haskell, but she was that college age. She was a young adult. She was pregnant, starting her family, and she had really turned her life around. And she was just, to me, everything I saw with, and actually my niece was the exact situation as her at that time. Finishing Haskell, she was pregnant, moving with her partner. They were, starting their life. And I think that's kind of what grabbed me so much and why I connected to it. But essentially, Savannah was, her kindness was exploited. Her upstairs neighbor in her apartment was a seamstress and asked for her help. Asked her to help with, to model some clothing, get measurements, things like that. Savannah went to that apartment and never left. Savannah was murdered in that apartment, and her baby was cut from her womb. And then Savannah was disposed of in a nearby river. So her family knew when they hadn't heard from her, something was wrong. But the police wouldn't take a missing persons report. They told the family she's probably out partying. She's probably blowing off some steam. She'll come back. She just needs a break. And I mention that because that's the stigma, that's the stereotype that we deal with, is they're probably partying, and I've had this conversation recently attending different events outside of the Native community where there's alcohol. And I've told somebody in this art gallery exhibition space where I don't think Natives are going to apply to put their stuff up. And they're just like, well, I was like, because you have alcohol. And they're just like, so what? And I have to explain to people that that's one of our biggest stereotypes is drunk party Indian, right? And here she was, pregnant, not partying, not in that part of her life. And that's the stereotype they went with, and so the cops wouldn't do anything. So the family and the community started searching for her on their own. And it was community members that found her, not the police department. And this was the case for me that was like everything that could go wrong went wrong for them. So seeing that community activate themselves was what I thought, this is how I would feel if this was in my community. But if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I sometimes I forget to mention, but the baby did survive. She's alive and well, thriving today. Her name's Paisley. But this forever changed not only this family, but that whole community. That's what activated them. That's what got them to be like, we don't got to take this. We can do this on our own. And so when I learned of all of this, I felt like I lost a relative. I was shook by this, shook by the level of violence, shook by the ignoring of what was in front of them and the no help, And so I reached out to, we have a IHS facility, Texas Native Health, in Dallas in the medical district. At the time, the CEO, I reached out to them because they were planning a community event, and I asked if we could hold a vigil. for Savannah. And because I told them, if I'm feeling this bad, I have family members that are like shook by this, other people are feeling this. So they said, you know, go ahead, we need it to happen. And so we started planning it, and I decided to put a call out in our community for people that were missing or had been lost to violence in our community in Dallas. I got a big list of names and learned all of these stories I hadn't heard of before. And that was kind of the start of our community wanting something, wanting and needing something organized around this crisis. During this time, too, it was my sister and I that planned this event that time. And there was 3 other community members that stepped up and offered song and prayer and different things and try to help. And after that, it was, you know, us 5 that were wanting to do more. And after this event, one of our initial members, he shared that an elder in his life was telling him, you know, this isn't new, you know, that we've always had this. This is just, there's just a name for it now. And that pushed him and his friend to be like, this is horrible that our elders feel like this. Like, we have to do something. So that was essentially the start of our organization. Deciding and seeing that our community needed something, but was beyond the awareness. You know, everybody already knew about it. Everybody knew that this was happening. And Savannah's case was just the case that really cemented the fact that people wanted to do more. I grew up not being afraid to speak up about things, and basically tossed into that arena when I was a teenager, working on mascot issues and talking about these things when I was in high school. And I got a lot of trust in our community because I did things like that. And so the members that we had were really embedded and had families in our community. We gained a lot of trust immediately, and I think that was the biggest thing that helped the work grow, is that it came from deep within the community in Dallas. And I'm a big fan of Professor Sarah Deer. Not only because we're both Muskogee Creek, but she is just amazing at what she does. She's an amazing person, amazing woman. But I share this quote often because it helps in these settings of discussing not only what this crisis is, but why we have it, why we're faced with this astronomically high and disproportionate rates of violence and missing people in our community. She says Native women and girls have been disappearing since 1492. And so I share that because it helps me kind of open the door for the conversation about the depth and the historical violence that's attached to why we are in the state we are today. Understanding that colonization was violent, understanding that colonization never ended, you know, that there's not an end date to, you know, 1492 it started. You know, that's not necessarily accurate either, right? You know, it could be before, it could be after, but there's no end date, right? So all of the violence that had to happen to gain land and to rid land of people and communities was violent. And with time, that violence just looked different. You know, it didn't just stop, but it looked different. You know, it may not have been massacres forever, but then it turned into boarding schools where there was separation of our children and our people and loss of language and customs and ceremonies and loss of self to assimilate. And yeah, I refer to this a lot because that helps me open the door to that part of that conversation. And it's always important to understand that how long we've had to deal with violence. And I always have these ladies up here with me. A tragic irony is that Sacagawea is one of the few Indigenous women, non-tribal people on this continent recognized. If you heard the name Sacagawea, raise your hand. Okay, everybody has, right? So we use Sacagawea in this history portion because it's important to understand that a lot of people have a twisted version of history, that it wasn't this huge fantasy romanticized version of Lewis and Clark needed help. It's like, why would a young woman be the one that's gonna lead these powerful people during that time across the country? Leave her people and subject herself to these things. At the bottom, raise your hand if you've heard of Matoa Aka. Okay, I don't ever get anybody that's heard of Matoa Aka, like ever. Nobody knows her. But people, raise your hand if you know Pocahontas. Okay, nobody ever knows that her name wasn't Pocahontas. That her name was Matoa Aka. She was Powhatan. And in a lot of MMIW, MMIP spaces, they refer to Matoa Aka as our first MMIW case. Because her life wasn't what Disney made it. Her life, she was 13 when she met John Smith. She was 13, there was no love story and singing raccoons, and she met this grown man. She didn't save her tribe. 13, grown man. She was taken from her family, community, taken overseas, never to return. That's trafficking. And so that helps people understand how normalized this level of violence has been within Native and Indigenous communities all over the place, not just in North America, not just in the U.S., but that helps us explain how it can be normalized that this level of humans are disposable. Certain human beings can be disposable, to the point where this very fetishized, romanticized, fantasy version of a trafficking case was sold globally. Billions of people know the story of Pocahontas, right? But nobody's ever thinking of it as, that's gross. She was a kid, that was trafficking. But that's the level of shock we need to have when talking about this to help people understand. If it was normalized and romanticized, then what happens to our 13-year-old girls now when they're taken, is that going to be romanticized too? Like, somebody's in love with this little 13-year-old girl. It's a very scary thought, but that's what we're up against when talking and educating about this crisis and understanding the depth of historical violence and how that directly impacts our existence in reality today. We said all of the work and the women are sacred, but they're all sacred. Historical or, Matoa Aka or Savannah. They're all sacred in that not only were they life givers, but they were individuals that had connections to people and connections to ancestors and relatives and tribal lands and ancestral lands. And even in that historical context, we want people to understand that they were sacred as well. And so today, moving from that historical context, there are many contributing factors to this crisis. Of course, history, like we've already touched on. Not only colonization, but understanding colonial gender-based violence. And that it was by design, right? That genders were separated. Matriarchal societies were not the norm for Europeans coming, right? Women and our two-spirit relatives weren't regarded in high regard like we did, right? It wasn't the norm for Europeans to come and see women making decisions, or it wasn't the norm for Europeans to come and see our non-binary relatives regarded as medicine people and sacred in their own right. That separation was an act of violence, keeping people away from each other and disregarding their space and community was a form of violence that we're still dealing with, and we haven't gotten past this yet. Another contributing factor here is energy extraction. So energy extraction is pipelines, wind farms, things like that. And we have energy extraction as a contributing factor because these are huge undertakings, right? You don't just one site and you have a pipeline working, right? It's massive, massive labor required to make these things happen. So what energy corporations do is they pick the site, which is never in the middle of a city, right? It's never in a town. You see it get fought all the time. It's too close to our town, too close to cities. They'll push them out towards reservations and tribal lands as close as you can be, because oftentimes we don't have the power to fight to go up against a corporation and say, we don't want it here, it's not safe. Which is why, we had, years back, we had Standing Rock happen and this huge global occupation of that. But when this labor for energy corporations happens, it brings in tons of individuals which happen to be male, as the people that put the pipelines or the wind turbines up. And they're away in these remote areas for a very long period of time. And so the corporations, they put up man camps. And man camps are uniform, white trailer homes, essentially. Just tons of them in the middle of nowhere. Full of individuals that really aren't connected to family, community, or anything, and they're just traveling to work. And when you're in that situation, oftentimes that brings a lot of unsavory and unsafe activity. Gambling, gang activities, drugs, trafficking, to say some examples. When I first started learning of man camps, this was way before I even started any idea that I ever wanted to organize around MMIW or this crisis in general. When I learned about them, I was doing environmental work, and I remember hearing from, I think it was a band of Chippewa, the story I heard from that police department and horror stories that came out of these man camps. And the one that stuck with me out of that was I had learned of a toddler that had been recovered from these man camps. That was essentially being passed around for sexual gratification between all of these men. That's a horror story, worst case scenario. But that's what happens. That's reality. And nobody is held accountable for what happens in these man camps. These energy corporations aren't, and I don't know how you get energy corporations to be held accountable. So what do, right? You have to deal with the fallout and help the people affected by such. And that leads us to lack of resources. And I have lack of resources on here, but I should actually update this to be lack of resources and lack of infrastructure to handle the resources. Because if you just have one small Indian Health Services clinic, you don't have the even the space to house a social worker, and not just a dentist and nurses and things like that, or a nurse practitioner, but you need to have mental health services, you need to have counselors, you need to have everything, right, that can help with the needs after somebody is recovered, or the needs of a family after somebody has gone missing and hasn't returned. We often lack that infrastructure to keep us as safe as possible. And some of that, a little bit of everything I've mentioned so far kind of culminates in the, not being able to assert tribal sovereignty. So the work we do, we're not situated on tribal land, like jurisdiction-wise. Of course, everyone is situated on ancestral tribal lands in any city that you're in. But in Dallas, we don't deal with jurisdiction issues like reservations and any kind of tribal lands would. And I bring this up because, I mentioned with the pipelines how cities don't want them, towns don't want them. They push them out to remote places where tribal communities are. But in these remote tribal communities, any non-native person can go and just, wreak havoc in these communities because tribal police departments cannot prosecute a non-native person. So a non-native person could go to tribal land and just, you can be a serial killer, you can be a serial rapist, and if you can get out of Dodge quick enough and get out of there, they can't do anything to you. And that essentially stems from the U.S. government not thinking we can be fair or unbiased in the prosecutory process and trials and things like that we can't handle that. But that is a direct obstacle of tribal sovereignty. If we can't prosecute, why do we have a police department and all of these things? And another thing that impacts is time with a missing persons case. I've seen this over and over and over with my personal experience. When something happens on tribal land, nobody knows exactly who needs to pick up the case. Our organization works in coalition with about 12 groups in Oklahoma that do this work. And that's where I learned everything before we started as an organization. I learned all this work from the ladies that do it in Oklahoma and in New Mexico as well. But with all of the cases I've seen in Oklahoma, helped with or just witnessed, and we all kind of are in on all of the cases, and we learn from each other while it happens, but we don't always directly help the case. But I have yet to see it settled who is in charge of that case in the first 48 hours. The first 48 hours are always the most important. You hear that on all of the TV dramas, right? Like 48 hours, you have to do it, because after that you have to totally shift focus and try every out there outside of the police department, like to find somebody, and that's crazy work to do. But what happens is when a family or a family member goes to file a report, they don't know if it's the local town or city police. They don't know if it's tribal police. They don't know if it's county police. And then after that, they don't know if FBI is supposed to be in charge of that case. It can get passed all the way through and all the way back. And it could be a week to do that. So what I've seen is that's how people, just like in Savannah's case, the family and community activate themselves and do the work. And that's what a lot of MMIW, MMIP groups do. And it's hell to do all of that work and then just hand everything you've done over to the cops and then they finish it. But I do understand that they can do it safely, more safely than I could at the end, when you got to bust in somewhere and get somebody out. I understand that, but it's hell to sit and wait and do all of that, and then half of the work you're doing is just basically screaming to get people's attention that you need that kind of help. So all of that comes out of not being able to assert tribal sovereignty. And I mentioned I was a product of the Relocation Act, or Relocation Program. I have that on our contributing factors list because it's important to understand that we have those obstacles on tribal land, but there's huge populations of American Indian citizens in major cities. I think it's 70% of like all tribal citizens are off reservation, in major cities. And within Dallas, with the Dallas Police Department, our IHS facility is celebrated 50 years, their 50th anniversary last year, and none of the patrolling officers in that district knew what that facility was. And we've learned things like when you're arrested, there's not an American Indian box to check off a race. So one of our biggest things is our data, right? It's skewed in so many ways. How are we ever going to get accounted for if the paperwork for this entity that's supposed to help keep people safe and find people don't even have a box to check off? But then I also learned just maybe 2 months ago, it's illegal to ask your race when you get arrested. And so when I learned that, I asked the sergeant we were talking to, so that means you just guess like every single time you arrest somebody? And he just kind of stopped, like, yeah, I guess so. And I was just thinking, like, how who do you know what you're looking for then, you know, like, but that's what we deal with being in a major city like Dallas, is law enforcement and city government level of people not really knowing that there's this huge community, and that we need, not only do we need resources, but we need resources accessible that are open and willing to learn about our culture and able to work with our people, because we have so much historical trauma that just follows us. You know, we deal with these separation issues on this generational level of what the boarding schools created. I don't know a family that's not raising or raised children that aren't biologically theirs. I'm an adoptive parent because of that situation. Our vice chair is because she's in that situation. Every member in our organization has been touched by MMIW case, murdered, missing, or they're in the situation of us navigating Indian child welfare and foster care and all of these things. We have the highest rates of Native children in foster care, and we have the highest rates of our children being adopted by non-Native people and immediately going to adoption. In my case, personally, my older sister and my husband and I, we raised my niece and 2 nephews. And we knew the moment that they were even in emergency kinship that we didn't have long. And when we got custody, that judge told us, I've never seen anybody get licensed so fast. And I told them we told them, you know, and we both have degrees in social work, so we understand how this process goes. And we told them, we knew we didn't have much time, because every level of care, from the hospitals, caseworkers, guardian ad litems, attorneys, everybody, our CASA advocate even, asked us to educate them on the Indian Child Welfare Act. And if they don't understand it, then how is it going to work and keep our children with us? So we face a lot of that. We face a lot of homelessness because people age out of the foster care system. We hear of cases all the time of people running away from their adopted families, and it's not necessarily that it's this horror story that you hear in the movies that they were abused and things. That happens often, but a lot of times we see people running back to their communities. So we have a lot of issues because of these contributing factors. It's a lot to kind of unpack when you're looking at the crisis. And I have this photo up there because the little girl at the very bottom corner, that's my mom's friend. They grew up in the projects together. My mom came on relocation with her family at that age. My father came later on. And I think that's important to understand, because tons of people came to these cities with so many hopes, right? The relocation program was assimilation under the guise of vocational training, basically. The promise of training and jobs and housing and a better life, but really coming and not getting any help and getting put in segregated, like project community housing, things like that. Families here on this side of town, my dad mentions how he was put in a boarding house on the other side of town, didn't know families were on the other side of town. So they were like lost in these big cities looking for community. And you hear stories of people are very proud to say, you know, we're a relocation family. And I've been asked, like, why? Why would you be proud of that? I'm like, because they survived. They're proud that they made it. I am of that first generation that was born and raised in Dallas because of relocation. My dad still talks about he's going to move back to Oklahoma. He's not moving back, but he still says back home. But home to me is Dallas. This is what I know. My very unique community of, I could say 100 different tribes are represented in Dallas and the North Texas region, like very easily, could be that many. But I often share that because I want people to read the bottom. That always gets me, is that, you know, this was in the This is in the Dallas Morning News, like that we were like settlers, right, coming to this new city, and you got to think about how they must have been treated and how they felt and things like that. So I think it's an important thing to understand. I mentioned about, not having your identity a box to check off. How can data be right? I can safely say there's never going to be correct data, because there weren't tabs being kept on people that were killed back in 1492, right? Our babies weren't being kept track of when there were mass graves at boarding schools and residential schools and things like that. So this level of violence hasn't been documented to what it needs to be. Everyone in this work says the data is sacred because you have names, right? And you speak these names, and again, they're individuals and they're sacred. But I do point people to the Sovereign Bodies Institute. I get to speak in university spaces a lot, and that's what I see is annoys people in that setting. That's the setting that if you're going to do a paper and going to do research, you need quantitative data, right? We don't have that. You're not going to find it. And I understand the need in that setting. I do. I've worked on projects at TCU with ad campaign classes and things like that, and tell them you're not just going to Google an image and use this, who is that? Whose picture are you using? Call them. They're call them. Find out. You can find a picture. You can find who it is in the picture. And that's something people are just not connected to, with connecting to an individual. They want the info. They want this, but it doesn't happen that way. So the Sovereign Bodies Institute, okay, let me take a step back. So there was two ladies that, one of them, Anita Lucchese, she has a history in geography and map making. And she had this idea to make a map and map data all the way across this map. Another lady, Abigail Echohawk, she runs the Urban Indian Health Institute now, or at least works there. I don't know if she runs it. They started this together. They compiled these huge lists of law enforcement entities and places to call, and they literally just years of collecting this data, calling and asking about cases and wanting numbers and all of this stuff. So they have now the Sovereign Bodies Institute, which is run by Anita, holds what people refer to as the MMIW database. And this database is sacred, right? It has all of this information, and if you're non-native, you're not getting the database. That's what the Sovereign Bodies has made their rule. There's no reason you need this entire database if you're not native. What do you need it for? They get called and asked a lot by FBI and law enforcement and media for this database, but they don't give it to them if they're not native. If they're not native. And even if you are native and you want it, they want to know why. What do you need? What do you need it for? If you need a case, we'll help you with this stuff. But it's kind of a blessing and a curse. You have what has been compiled, but you're so protective over it because you're so used to things being exploited. What is it going to be used for? So that's something to keep in mind when looking for present day stats. But I would refer anybody to the Sovereign Bodies Institute for the work on the database, and they have reports every so often of updated information about this crisis. How to be involved with the MMIW movement. I get asked this a lot, so we've come up with some things to kind of bullet point that kind of conversation, but I'm just going to start going through that. So be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations. We, not only for people will say things are too political or anything like that, not that, just that kind of uncomfortable conversation, but be prepared that you could be very triggered. This work is can be very re-triggering, triggering, traumatizing in a lot of different ways. But you're going to have conversations that may spark those things for you. and you have to learn how to take care of yourself and stay grounded and have a mental health wellness plan to do this work. Be prepared to step back and not center yourself in this work. We all understand, not only white savior complex, but just savior complex. People want to be the savior. People want to, I have the answer. You don't have the answer to this. That's not going to happen, and there's a lot of people, even in, organizing activist spaces, there's a lot of performative, actions, and you have to be prepared to, that's not always going to be what's needed. So that's when we say, you got to take a step back and not center yourself, because if there's a case and you happen to come to our organization and want to help, and we do have a case, you're not going to be, coddled into this is what we do. We're like, no, we're in this mode. You got to step back, and now you got to just kind of wait and be patient. Be prepared to check your privilege, and that's not just race. People always assume I just mean, we know white people have some privilege. We know that, but your gender as well and how you identify. Even in our Native community, I tell our men too, you gotta acknowledge you have a privilege, in a lot, especially in Native spaces. And I can speak from, personal experience. We have a lot of men in our communities that are all about MMIW. We're going to keep people safe and power to the matriarchs and whatnot, but they'll never hand us the mic, and we're the ones doing the work. That's a privilege people got to check. If you're an educator and you have students, if you're an employer and you have employees you take care of, these privileges need to be checked. I have a privilege. I know that I get to come in these spaces and address people, and not everybody in my community that has a story to tell is okay with doing that. So I have to be very mindful that I do have that privilege. There are often times where if I get asked, I try to give it to other people in our organization. I try to have, we strongly believe in survivor leadership. And I'd like our members and our officers especially that have dealt with these things to be that, but sometimes it's too much. And so I have to know that my privilege of not having that be my story, that I'm healthier in a lot of ways, that I can handle a little bit more at different times. Be prepared to listen. Even within all of our casework, every case is different. And I jumped right into it and skipped over our logo at the very beginning. That artwork is our vice chair. That's her artwork, and that's a part of her healing journey. Her and I connected shortly after we had the Savannah Vigil, and we decided we were going to be a program under this other nonprofit I had been working with. We literally put it out into the world that we are an MMIW group. Less than a week later, we got our first case. And it was her, and she reached out to me and said, I need my people. The cops aren't doing anything. Y'all got to help me. We had no rapid response protocol, anything like that, ready to help people. But I just went with my gut and thought, I at least got to go, right? I got to be with the family. So I did that, and I could just tell that something was heavy with her, with the grandma. The grandma was the one that contacted me. It was her granddaughter that was had run away, but they had heard that she was abducted after. They couldn't get the police to take a report because she was a habitual runaway. But from just spending that day with them, I just kept thinking, what is it? And it's she just wanted to chat, right? And so by the end of the day, after I had spent time with them and helped get flyers, and the cops wouldn't do their job, and so my activist mindset kicked in. It's how do you get the cops to do their job? You call the DA. Called the DA, then we got a police report, then we got a flyer made, then we got a case number, so we were able to get it to the news stations, and things started moving within hours. But it's after that, it's I I gained the trust, and I started to learn that she had been trafficked. She had been abducted and trafficked as a child. And that's why the listening is so important, because you'll understand the obstacles within the family. I have yet to work a case of a teenage girl that there's not more than one generation that has dealt with molestation, assault, rape, abduction, anything like that. And that was the very first case I had. It had every example you could think of. Had happened multiple generations. And I don't think if I had listened to myself and been patient and just listened to the family, I wouldn't have got that trust to learn all that and learned how to carefully navigate anything with that specific case in that family. But that grandmother is Christy Swimmer McLemore, and she is the vice chair for our organization now. That was the beginning of her healing journey. She hadn't talked about things, she hadn't done anything to help grow in a healthy way. You know, like she'd done the self-care, but not to the level of healing with this directly. And that's where our artwork, and that's why it's so important to us, is that there's two women on the logo, and that's her and her granddaughter. Her granddaughter was recovered, that case, but she was recovered, and it was about 10 days later. She was recovered with local pimps in the area in a hotel. With other girls, their hair was cut, hair was dyed, and they all had plane tickets to California. It was very close to like never seeing them again. And her granddaughter is still very much on a journey of healing, and it's been hard to witness, you know, how difficult her journey has been too. But these are the things you learn doing these cases, and that's why listening and patience and respect is so important. Find the work already happening. No need to reinvent the wheel, right? I've done this presentation all over the country, and people are willing to donate to our organization. And the first thing I ask them is if they did the research to find a local group, and they always find a local group. If it's not a full-on MMIW, MMIP organization, there are individuals being advocates and working with other programs that are helping local families in this scenario. So I highly recommend doing that. In our area, at the moment, I believe we are the only ones that do actual like casework and actually work with the family and help through law enforcement and things like that. I don't know of another group in Texas at the moment that does that type of work, but there are several that do advocacy and education work. Utilize your connections. Like I mentioned, I come from an organizing and activist space where I knew the news desk numbers and folks that worked at media or different levels of anybody. If you know somebody that works at a news station, get a flyer to them and see if that makes it come up quicker. Anything can help. Offer fundraising support, and I say that because fundraising doesn't just mean we need $500. It's if you have access to get us 100 copies of a flyer like immediately, that's better than any money you can give when there's a case. You go through flyers like crazy. And paper flyers are always needed. That increases recovery rates by like 65% when there's paper flyers in an area. Paper flyers go so quick too, it's crazy. Because if you have any kind of leads, you go to that area and you find any 24-hour spot, you're gonna find somebody that has seen them. Walmarts, Waffle House, truck stops, anywhere that you can get in 24 hours. And you'd be surprised how many places are like that. You feel like there's not that many, but if there's one, there's like 10 in that area that people will go to and either stay overnight, or that's where a lot of the unsavory behavior happens. There is a lot of history to unpack when dealing with American Indians and Indigenous peoples, so be patient. I can't stress that enough. I've been in spaces too where, I can be presenting, but if we have somebody that has a story to tell, and this is the first time they're going to tell it, I'm going to let them tell it. I don't care if that's interrupted me or thrown off a schedule. Like, if it happens, I know now because of this work how important it is that if anybody feels compelled to speak, they need to say it, because they may never speak about this again. And I've literally seen this happen with elders. They hear something and they finally feel safe enough, and it could have taken their whole lives to feel okay and safe enough at that point. So yeah, please just be patient. If you share, or if you see information online, like if you follow any of our social media, you'll see we share not only our casework flyers, but other organizations as well. And we try to share all surrounding states. We have a lot of cases that trickle in back and forth over state lines. Share it online. It really makes a difference. Here is our contact information. Our email is checked daily. And I say this at every presentation. I don't want to have to help you, but we're here to help you. You don't have to be Native to ask for help. That is our core focus of who we want to help. But we've been asked by other communities, even if it's just for guidance. Because the first thing I ask is if somebody's filed a missing persons report. I've been asked by non-Native community members for help, and I ask that, and they're like, well, I'm not calling the killer cops. And that's real. People have that trauma, and they're not going to work with the cops. But we'll do everything we can to help you do it as safe as possible. Our email gets checked daily. Our Facebook is really active. Our Instagram is active. We check all of those messages all the time. So if you need any help or to contact me, you can get me through these right here. And these are our just different activities we have. Bringing in the red dress at the processional at a powwow outreach, and that one is our anti-time. We strongly believe in kinship support. We believe in chosen family. We believe in people may not feel safe in their own families, and community support and family kinship is really important to helping people know they deserve to be safe. So we have anti-time, uncle time, two-spirit time. And May 5th, the top second picture, that is our May 5th proclamation in the city of Dallas. That's at City Hall. May 5th is National Day of MMIW awareness across the country. Dallas recognizes it with a proclamation every year. But yeah, if you ever want to connect, you'll find something happening on May 5th anywhere. And yeah, that was a lot of information. I know I say a lot, and I'm sure I can clarify or anything like that. So any questions, if there are any, I'm free.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. This will start the Q&A. I will bring you the microphone if you have a question. And great talk. Thank you for coming and sharing all this information with us.
Like I said, I know it's a lot, so even if I can clarify.
It is. Well, I think it's also a lot because it's not something that you hear a lot about. Like, I don't think Indigenous stories, Indigenous struggles get the same attention as other struggles. So it is a dump, but it's also a starting place to where you can learn more in more detail. So does anyone have any questions, first off? Bring it in.
First and foremost, I want to say I liked the presentation. It was actually very informative. I also wanted to ask you in reference to the Indigenous people with the legal aspect, with working with law enforcement. When you do, like you stated, when you do find a case or you're working a case and you guys are doing that and you can't necessarily prosecute someone or not prosecute, but arrest or penalize them for their actions. How does that kind of work? Like, is it like a coalition or a partnership or?
So if it's on tribal land and tribal jurisdiction comes into play, you literally have to figure out who's going to be in charge of the case. Like I said, tribal law enforcement doesn't have a lot of teeth in any of the laws, regarding a non-native person. They can't really do anything. So that means they have to work with whatever town or city surrounds them, whatever county is there, and oftentimes missing persons cases and murder cases require the FBI. But cases on tribal land reservations aren't usually on the top of FBI list of things to do. So there's a lot of waiting, tons of waiting. And that's literally how you see communities recover people. I know ladies in Oklahoma that I've learned things from, like they've gone in a caravan to a house to get somebody out of the house with no cops to protect them, and they could get in trouble, legally. I've been stopped in Dallas, literally when I knew somebody was a runaway, but I knew where they were and I was gonna go get them. I had somebody at DPD, a friend, say like, "Stop, you're gonna get in trouble." But I'm just like, well, they're not gonna be here. they're in downtown Dallas, from a little bitty Oklahoma town. Like, they don't know what they're doing. It's really a matter of what you're willing to do, and yeah, it's just that time.
And another struggle too with the jurisdiction is sometimes, like, I know a case, this is near like Tahlequah in Oklahoma, where Cherokee land is, and there was a murder case on tribal land, and you get the OSBIN, and sometimes the government will file lawsuits because they want to weaken the sovereignty, which ties in. It's like a double-edged sword where they're not really dealing with the crime, but they're trying to weaken the sovereignty of the nation. And we have lots of cases that go to the Supreme Court that were related to that fear and that worry of the coalition struggle.
Hi. Thank you for presenting today. I have heard about some of the missing women on like Twitter and online and stuff like that, and I just wish there was more attention brought to the crisis that you're speaking about. Is there a plan that you guys have to make your job easier? Like, is there, like, can we like advocate to go to Congress and pass a bill so that way the jurisdiction is under the tribal control? Or is there anything that you're working with, like local city, with the city of Dallas and their police department to kind of make those changes? Like you said, there's no checkbox of who you're looking for. Is there a plan in place for that?
Can you hear me? Okay. So there are, like, with Savannah, there's Savannah's Act. There are things that go to Congress often, but they're very hard to get passed. In Oklahoma, they just passed, it's Casey's Act and Ida's Law. And those things were directly written to help law enforcement understand how different a case of an American Indian citizen is, because of the jurisdiction and where things happened and things like that. It's like this law is to help educate the people that are supposed to help the process. So these things happen a lot of different places. I know in California it's called, I think, the Feather Alert, and it's supposed to bring that awareness to how individual and unique this case could be. In Texas, we're not ready for that. I could just see how hard it would be. In Texas too, we're really unique in the fact that I get asked all the time, like, well, when are you going to go to the Capitol? When are you going to do this and that? And I have to tell and remind people that in Texas, we're so unique because not only are we helping American Indian citizens, there is this difference between being a tribal citizen and just having indigenous descendancy. If you're indigenous, you don't necessarily always have like a tribal card, things like that, and we don't want to exclude. I would hate to have a law enacted that it would exclude me helping an indigenous person from south of this imaginary border, right? Because they don't have this acknowledgement that we have. You know, we have to have a pedigree like a dog, you know, but that's all of the red tape we deal with, you know. So it's like it's a very difficult thing to figure out what exactly is going to help. Like I said, I would hate to have some kind of law enacted and it wouldn't help me help everybody. But these alerts, I think, are the start. I got to speak with Beto O'Rourke when the last campaign, and I mentioned this, and everybody that was in this space was like, that makes perfect sense too. But it's like, I was like, I don't know what this is going to do, you know, like what's going to happen with this. But I say that in every space I get to. These alerts are going to, I think, be the first kind of step of that basic education where it needs to happen first.
I'll ask a question too. But if you have another question, I'll let you ask.
You were just now speaking in reference to the red tape or the bureaucracy of the matter. Is that something that you guys like truly like just solely focus on, or is that like how is it something that you guys are combating to like reach more people, fight more of the injustices? Like what are some of your tactics in reference to dealing with that bureaucracy or that red tape?
With where we're located too, it's hard because the work we do specifically doesn't deal with jurisdiction. You know, we don't have those type of issues. So I hate to speak for the groups that do have that issue, that are in Oklahoma, that you can cross 10 reservations in a day. You know, so it's like we don't deal with that. The closest reservation to us is in Livingston, Texas, and we've helped 2 cases there, the Alabama Coshada Tribe of Texas. And working with that tribe on these 2 cases, their government and tribal police department were so open to any guidance that we were able to offer. So, you know, even the experience that we have dealing with tribal land and tribal law enforcement wasn't the bad end of the spectrum of the red tape. You know, we had that support. There are some tribal police departments that they just don't know what they're doing, and that makes the red tape even worse. You know, like, or there are some smaller tribal police departments that they'll share too much information, and that makes the case even worse. But it's hard to advocate for combating that red tape and that bureaucracy that you mentioned if you're not in it. You know, and we're in it in a different way in a city. Like, we have a connection with DPD now, and we're able to bring up 2 cases that we're helping that they're still fighting for justice. And that gets shut up real quick. So it's like we have this very new relationship with DPD, but I don't know how much that's going to help. You know, so I feel like this type of education, this conversation is what we can do best at the moment at different times to combat that. Because I feel like if you're in the right space, like in a university setting, in a college setting, you have people on the cusp of getting into jobs that could be help with policy change and the medical field and law enforcement. I did some presentations at TCU, and next thing I know, because we were nursing students there, we had Tarrant County CASA advocates wanting to learn about the Indian Child Welfare Act now. So that to me was huge. That to me is combating the red tape of having people that don't know how to help a Native child that has been abducted, and now they're never going to be with the Native community again. So it's like, that to me is how we do that.
If you are curious about, like, any of you, about that kind of tribal jurisdiction, there's a podcast. It's called This Land, and she I forgot blank on her name. Blanking. I'll find it. She's Cherokee. She works for Cherokee Nation, and she charts the case that I was talking about that gets indisputed over murder on Indigenous territory, and how they were using it to try to take away sovereignty and power. But it's called This Land, and like from the beginning, it goes through the court case, and they take how they defend the defendant, because in all of this, they like go through it all. Because there's a multi-jurisdiction of whether it's OSBI, which is Oklahoma Bureau of Indian Affairs, and all of that. There's also there's another podcast, Red Nation, I think, that just does a lot of like Native and Indigenous culture, like movies and stuff. But This Land does a lot of policy talk and a lot of stuff. I do have a question. Rebecca Nagel. That's right. I was like, I knew you say it. Rebecca Nagel, This Land. And it's a really good.
There are really good documentaries as well. Bring Her Home, Murder in Bighorn County. These are documentaries that you can watch that really show that red tape. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned OSBI, and we've talked about FBI. Mm-hmm. Those are supposed to be the ones that are supposed to be like the kind of save all, right? Like FBI is going to come in and say that doesn't happen. I've done a presentation at the FBI in Dallas last fall. I asked them who covers the reservations in Texas, and they said there are none. We have 3 reservations in Texas, and I was like, well, my husband belongs to the Alabama Coshawta Tribe of Texas, and that's like not even 4 hours away south of here. Like, that's a reservation. And their response was, oh, that's the new one, right? So, I mean, it's every level of government and law enforcement, everything you can think of that needs education. It's crazy.
Does anyone have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I was just wondering what steps, what's the process that goes into locating and recovering a missing person?
So first, the very first thing we do is we tell families and we ask families if they've filed a missing persons report. And that's, even despite, how I've said, there's so much red tape and there's all this time. If you do not have a missing persons case report number, you can't get help from Center for Missing and Exploited Children, foundations like For the One, Poema Foundations, all of these places that have expertise, that have cadaver dogs and equine searches and things like that. If you do not have a missing case report number, you will not get any help. Media, newspaper, nobody will take a missing persons flyer if there is not a case report number. And so people, when they say things like, I'm not calling the killer cops, something like that, I have to remind them that that's going to be an obstacle to get that extra help. Get the help like what we do times 100. The cases that I've been able to help and that I've directed them to For the One Foundation, they have teams all over the state. And so they have people that can they have on the ground flyers immediately when they get a tip, things like that. So that's the first thing. And that it's so important. People don't realize you just got to file, but then there's all the, call 911, no, call the missing persons unit. So we have to help with our experience of what's the next step, what's the next best thing to do. After that, it's distribution of flyers. Sometimes there's on the ground searches, which is a last resort for us. Because if you stumble upon a crime scene, if you touch something, it's going to get all thrown out and you're not going to get any of the justice that you need. We helped a case in Mississippi. There weren't any, at that time, any MMIW groups for that family to reach out to, and they were put in contact with us because we were the closest. At the point when we were put in contact with them, they couldn't get tribal police, county police, or FBI to come out to look for this family member. This family knew that their relative liked to party, but she never stayed out past a weekend. She was always gonna come home. They knew something was wrong. That's something that we do is we accept the family knowing their relative, knowing what's out of the norm. And we remind people too, even our own communities, that just because you party or you're an addict or you're homeless, that you do not deserve to be met with any violence. They knew something was wrong. They were protesting outside their tribal police for help. They called me and said, we're going out and looking. And I was able to say, like, don't touch anything. Don't let the kids be on the front line of, literally, because you line up, you walk through spaces and lines looking for people. And I'm glad they called when they did, because they found her almost immediately on their own. And they had to get out of there. So it's like, it can be from one extreme to, you know, just putting them in touch with a foundation like For the One, or they're going to activate themselves and do that, and you have to guide them to how to do it the safest. Yeah, it could go so many different ways. I hope that answered that too. I'm not sure if it did.
What's a major takeaway that you want everybody in this room to take away from your speech?
I guess first that history really does impact our current everyday existence. There's this disposability factor that's been placed on not only Native people but all people of color, because history has made it so, has normalized this level of violence on many different ways. But also that as just a community member, as somebody in society, that we have the right to do a lot more than government and law enforcement let us believe. You know, like, it's okay if we ask these questions and do these things. We have to do this to keep ourselves safe. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that you have to go with your gut. You know when something is wrong, and you can act on it. You can start this stuff. There are people that want to help you do that and do it safe. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Anybody else? No. Well, let's give her another round of applause
Thank you.
for sharing.